Okay, this is the short lecture for interaction ritual theory. We're mostly talking about Randall Collins wrote a book, 2004 book, detailing this theory. One of your assignments was to read some excerpts from the main chapter that sort of presents the theory. Just some background, we're not reading, the main background is Durkheim and Goffman, but we're not reading any Goffman, so I'm just going to talk about it, and he talks about Goffman extensively in the chapter that you read, the parts that you read. Goffman was probably the most important American sociologist. He kind of pioneered the study of microsociology, micro-interaction. But I'll talk about him in a second. So the thing about interaction ritual theory is it's very closely related to Durkheim's ideas about collective effervescence, which we've talked about a lot in this class. So that should be familiar. The basics of the theory should be pretty easy to kind of catch on to because we've talked about some of the more important ideas. But the main difference, the main thing to know about interaction ritual theory is that the unit of analysis is not the individual as it is for Goffman, for Durkheim and for Swidler, but the unit of analysis is the situation the actors are in. Okay, so if you've had a research methods course, the term unit of analysis should be familiar. That's like the actual thing that you're studying. Most sociological analysis is about either individuals, or sometimes the unit of analysis is a group or an organization or something like that. But in this particular line of sociological theory, the unit of analysis is the situation. And the idea is that there's this emotional energy that is created in every interaction that we have. There's this kind of emotional energy that takes place, and that the successful interaction rituals are those which create this emotional energy. And so humans will seek out these situations where they're getting this emotional energy, and they sort of participate in one interaction ritual. It could be something as simple. It could be like the article you read about going to church and participating in a ritual and what we think of as more traditionally as a ritual, or it could be something as simple as like having a conversation, and or the cover of the book of Collins's book has this picture of 4 people smoking cigarettes, and that's like an example of one of these mini interaction rituals that creates emotional energy for the actors, and then they take that emotional energy to their next interaction, and it sort of spreads through society in that way, the emotional energy that's created from one interaction ritual to another. That's why it's called interaction ritual chains, because you have these chains of events that are all about creating this emotional energy. Okay, so really think about it as collective effervescence. That's like, so we've talked so much about that's this feeling that's created when groups come together and focus collectively on something, usually like a totem or an object or a symbol. But Goffman sort of took this to another level and said that there's everything that we do are these rituals. Okay, so everyday interactions. So in this first bullet point under Goffman here, the types of rituals he talked the most about were things like salutations, compliments, like giving someone a compliment, any kind of what he called deference and demeanor exchanges. So that means, like, let's say you're interacting with someone who's in a position of authority or something, like a professor in a college setting or a boss or something like that. There are these modes of interacting where one person gives deference to another person and acts with a particular demeanor towards that interaction. And Goffman's sort of claim was that these are these micro rituals, these micro interactions that are really crucial for reinforcing the structure of society because of the way they reinforce status differences. And so another example would be like class groups, okay? Or think about like racism or classism, where the kind of interaction that someone, let's say someone from a lower class, that's poor and uneducated, the kinds of salutations and the ways that they will interact is different, and so it allows people to identify persons within that particular group, and then judge them or treat them accordingly. Okay, so that doesn't mean that we're all like going around looking for reasons to mistreat someone or something like that. It just means that it's a way for people to identify the structures in society and identify the differences between individuals and particular groups, and then our interactions correlate with those differences. And again, the focus on the situation instead of the individuals is what is making it not about, people aren't trying to reinforce these structures, but these interaction rituals explain why these structures get reproduced and reinforced over time. So for Goffman, one of the things he was a brilliant writer, and he would go in, like, he has this book called Asylum, where he went into basically an insane asylum and would watch the interactions with people who basically didn't know the proper way to participate in these salutations and these basic interactions. And so the argument is that he was making was that the best way to understand how structured these situations are, these just everyday, day-to-day interactions, is to examine situations where the structure breaks down. So someone who doesn't know how to do it the right way, will allow us to see how structured it is, and allow us to sort of analyze and say, okay, here's what it's like where that structure is missing, and so we can learn from that. And still goes back to Durkheim in the sense that I'm on the last bullet point here, in the sense that the totem, he's still thinking about totems in the Durkheim sense. So the Durkheim idea is that people gather around totems and then feel this collective effervescence as a result. What Goffman is saying is that in modern society, the totem becomes more and more abstract, and the key is to think about the totem as the individual. So in a liberal society, liberal meaning like where we esteem the value of the individual, like democracy is based on the idea of every person should get a vote. So the totem, the main thing that we're trying to reinforce as this important cultural object or end is the individual. Okay, so we esteem the individual so much that becomes the thing that we're trying to lift up and bring to the surface of any interaction, and so it's these, so in that's why the situation, when we get involved in these deference and demeanor exchanges, there's so much kind of code or like manners or rules that we have to follow, because we're trying to affirm each individual who's participating in that interaction. So that made less sense than I wanted it to, but hopefully as I go that will make a little more sense as I talk about how Collins built off of Goffman's ideas there. Okay, so the basic idea of interaction rituals is that humans seek this thing that he calls emotional energy, okay, which is basically like, again, we've talked about this a ton, that's basically like the result of collective effervescence is this emotional energy that people feel. And the quest for this, that we humans are just kind of like walking around looking for these situations where we can feel emotional energy, that's what he says drives the market of options for social action. Okay, so situations or interaction rituals that provide emotional energy are the successful ones, and ones that don't, people will seek those less and less. So the definition of a ritual then is, which again is similar to Durkheim but slightly different because it's focused on the situation, not the individual. This third bullet point here, the definition of a ritual is a mechanism of mutually focused emotion and attention producing a shared reality. And again, that's like, think about the deference and demeanor thing, like you're talking to a professor or a boss, and the way that you interact in this deferential way, produces this shared reality that both actors feel, and so yeah, that last bullet point I already said. Successful interaction rituals, people experience the emotional energy, then they take that emotional energy to their next interaction ritual, and it just sort of like perpetuates in that way. Okay, so the ingredients of successful interaction rituals. I don't want to really go into too many details. On the article, I think there was a really nice summary in the God is Like a Drug article by Willman and the other authors. On page 652 and 653, it talks about these ingredients, and it summarizes it. It also talks about it, I think, starting on page 33 in the chapter from Collins, for a few pages. But really, I think if you just want to get the most basic idea in the simplest way, that the description that they talk about in the Willman article, starting on page 652, about these ingredients of successful interaction rituals is really a clear way to think about it. Okay, so successful interaction ritual will have an assembly of participants. It will have, which is kind of self-explanatory, barriers excluding outsiders. Now this is where you can think about Christian Smith and subcultural identity theory. So if there are these boundaries that exclude others from the ritual, then that can be a powerful ingredient in making the interaction ritual successful. Okay, so again, talking about class differences, if the way that salutations work, like just day-to-day conversation, you go to someone at work and say, "Oh, how was your day yesterday?" or something like that, and really in that interaction, you're not actually trying to find out how their day was. It's more like this formality. You're just trying to make polite conversation. Because if someone was to say, if you were to say, "Hey, how was your day yesterday?" in a really casual way, and that person would kind of like break down and explain to you all their life problems, that would actually be a breakdown of the interaction ritual that's supposed to be taking place, which is this sort of casual conversation. And so people who don't know how to do that in the right way, who don't have the quote-unquote correct manners, will not be able to participate successfully in the interaction ritual that other people will be able to. So that's this barrier. That's just one example of a barrier. In the Willman article, they actually talk about with megachurches, one of the things that make megachurches successful is that they actually have low barriers excluding outsiders. It's appealing to a wide variety of people, but I would actually even argue that because it's this subcultural identity of evangelical Christianity, that there is still a barrier, because you have to have like a sensibility for that style of religion. And so even though thousands of people participate in these religious interaction rituals, there's still important barriers that are excluding outsiders, that are creating the possibility for this interaction ritual to take place. And again, that's all goes back to the Christian Smith subcultural identity thing. Like, strong symbolic boundaries can help create the unity that's needed for these kinds of things to take place. Okay, mutual focus of attention. That goes back to the Durkheim idea about focusing on the totemic object, the totem. You can think about the Aboriginal peoples dancing around the symbol of their clan, and the mutual focus is what creates collective effervescence. Well, in this case, it's similar, but it's just it's more and more abstract because of this modern society. So again, in this picture here, the mutual focus of attention might be some object like cigarettes, or just a conversation, cup of coffee, something like that. And then the final ingredient is a shared mood, and that has to do with the dispositions of the actors involved. So basically, again, thinking about class differences or race differences or something like that might make one person, the interaction has a different disposition towards the interaction, then it will make it less likely to be successful in producing this emotional energy. Okay, so interaction ritual chains, one of the things that Collins argues is that the main contribution, like the main value of this theory, is that it basically gives you a theory for the mechanism for how symbols are created. Okay, so like a lot of you wrote in your original articles about Durkheim and collective effervescence about like Greek life. Okay, so think about like a symbol that represents a sorority or fraternity, and the reason, what Collins would say is that interaction ritual chain theory explains how those symbols become powerful and how they're created, and that has to do with this. You have several successful interaction rituals over time that provide emotional energy for the actors, and that's what gives the symbol power. And if it wasn't for those, the symbol wouldn't emerge as being a symbol. And just really briefly, the difference between Swidler. So we think about Swidler's toolkit theory. So Swidler, the unit of analysis is the individual, and she talks about individuals, confronting situations, and then they're drawing on their toolkit, their cultural toolkit, like what they understand, to interact in that situation. Okay, but Collins is not. Again, he's focused on the situation, so it's not about what actors would tend to do in a given situation. It's about situations that tend towards a particular outcome. And in some ways this can sound more deterministic, like he's completely not concerned at all about the agency of actors involved. That's an important critique of Collins, and something definitely that's he addresses in that, hopefully you read in the chapter, he addresses that extensively, that he doesn't necessarily think his theory is exclusive of actors that have agency and can actually, be informed and create the situation themselves, but he still thinks that the most fruitful sociological way to think about it is to think about situations that tend towards a particular outcome, not to think about individuals and how they're interacting in that situation. And so again, the main difference is this idea that the unit of analysis is the situation. Okay, so I've already talked a little bit about this. Interaction rituals in megachurches. I mean, there's a lot of empirical examples. I just thought this one was it was pretty easy to grasp, talking about interaction rituals in megachurches. And again, this sort of does go back to our conversation about religion and culture, that sometimes religion provides the easiest way to see cultural theory, because religion is so, the roots of culture is in religion, and so their descriptions of the interaction rituals that take place in megachurches, I think, just really bring home the theory in a way that makes it understandable. So the data in this particular study was, they start with a population of about 1,250 megachurches, and then they selected just 12 of those that they thought were the most representative. It's not a random sample though, that's important, but the people who put together this data set just took 12 they thought seemed the most representative, and then they conducted these focus groups over time. So there were all these surveys. So the reason why there's 16,000 surveys is like 12 megachurches, a few hundred participants each week that would do the surveys over a long period of time. So they have this huge amount of surveys that sort of tracks these the participants of these focus groups over time. And then based on that, they selected 282 individuals and did these long interviews. And so there's both qualitative and quantitative data here, which I think makes for a good, they do a good job of synthesizing all this different kind of data to talk about in their results. So this ritual outcomes bullet point, I don't want to say too much about it. It's like, this is part of the quiz. It's really an easy quiz actually, but because all you have to do for one of the questions is to talk about one of these and give some examples from the article. So I actually don't want to completely just give it away, but these are the 5 ritual outcomes that they talk about. Emotional energy, feelings of belonging, membership symbols, feelings of morality, and heightened spirituality. And the one thing that I thought was sort of conceptually confusing was that I would say the last 4 on this list are all examples of emotional energy, so I don't know why they did that as a separate outcome. But and what the last sort of important point I think that was key in helping you understand the theory is that this is a theory of interaction ritual chains. So this idea that we go from situation to situation, get some amount of emotional energy at each one, and we carry that to the next one. And in the megachurch example, they talk about that very explicitly, because they're saying that that's why people have to go back to church every week to sort of fill up on the emotional energy that's created in these interaction rituals, and then it starts to decline over time, the emotional energy that they derive from those situations, and so then they go back, and it's this thing that repeats itself over time. And in each of these ritual outcomes, they describe how that happens. And so, okay, that's that. Let me know if you have any questions. That should do it. It's an easy quiz and an easy discussion, so that should be good.